Let's make sense of these numbers now with Alp Mehmet, the chairman of Migration Watch. Alp, these are big numbers. First of all, your reaction. Officially, last year, net migration, one of the highest numbers on record, although 10% down on the year before.
Well, let's look at a little bit more detail. Look, first of all, 685,000 is eye-wateringly high, unquestionably, and it's got to come down. However, if you remember this time last year when we had the first figures looking back at 2022, it was 606,000. By the end of the year, we were 26% up on that. If we get 26% increase on the number that we've had now, we're talking about well over 800,000, 860,000
Although that's on because there was
people.
a methodological change that meant that we got that big increase.
Whatever. Let's not say 26,000, 26%. Let's say it was only 10%. We're still looking at 750,000 by the end of the year, so not very different to the year before.
And any of these numbers are the size of a considerable city in the United Kingdom.
Sure, yeah. Look, if net migration continued at 600,000, we're looking at a population increase of 20 million people by 2046. That's not so far away.
Are we, though? Because in concert of this...
Yes, we are, Tom. We are.
In concert with higher migration, we've also got a lower birth rate. So in some ways, you can sort of see how politicians are trying to plug gaps because...
Sorry to interrupt you, but it's taking account of that lower birth rate that leads us to... And bear in mind that the ONS and the OBR are looking at annual net migration of 315,000. And even that will lead to an increase by 2036 of 6.5 million people, of which 92% is actually due to immigration. Wow. So, yeah, we are talking about the lower birth rate. If the birth rate increases and it sticks to around 750,000, 750,000 or more, we're talking about much more than 20 million people. What are we going to do with all that? Over the last Parliament, we've had an increase of 2 million people. Net migration has contributed 2 million people to our population. In fact, immigration has brought 4 million people. These are huge numbers. Housing.
Enormous numbers, and every mainstream party says they're too high. But we've spoken about the last Parliament, we've spoken about 2022, we've spoken about 2023. Now I want to talk about this year, 2024, because from January, there were changes that were brought in by Robert Jenrick, who since quit the government. There were changes supported by Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary. These changes have brought, on month-by-month data, we don't have the annual figure, of course, the year's not over. On month-by-month data, health and social care visas are down 76%. On month-by-month data, health care visas for dependents down 58%, and indeed sponsored study visas, that reduction in dependents, 79%.
Yeah.
So the big changes that we actually won't see in the annual figures until this time next year.
Well, firstly, we're talking about applications. We're not talking about people who arrived. So that doesn't always follow the increases, the number of people who come.
But it
doesn't always tell you.
There won't be these numbers specifically. There'll be a considerable drop.
Not a considerable drop. If you look at what makes up overall migration, in fact, this is only going to be a fairly minor part of it. If you look at the number of visas issued for work, they almost doubled. 75% up. I mean, they went up.
But isn't this the curious thing about last year's numbers? Only around 150,000 visas were issued for work. All of the other visas were dependents, students, family reunion. I mean, if we're looking at this 685,000 number, A tiny fraction is work visas. Perhaps it doesn't matter that much that work visas are up
Well,
if all the others are down.
If it's 423,000, that's not insignificant out of the overall total. And it's absolutely right that the dependents, the people who were getting low-skill, low-paid jobs, transferring into work visas from study visas, that quite rightly should stop. But
Absolutely bonkers that undergraduate students could bring dependents. I mean, what's that about?
Undergraduate students couldn't, but nevertheless...
Master's students, I beg your pardon.
Master students did, and the master students, frankly, there were a lot more dependents who came here than there were students. If you look at Nigeria, there were many more dependents coming from Nigeria than there were.
One person would come for a 1 year's master course and bring 4 dependents.
Yeah, and what sort of master's course was it?
And were they at the best institutions in the country?
Look, what I'm really concerned about is that neither party, main party, who's going to form, whichever one forms the next government, and polls have suggested it's going to be Labour, whichever one it is, don't expect numbers to come down significantly. We're going to continue at this rate. The only way that it will be brought down is by having a cap. That is the only realistic way that you are going to make sure that the numbers that you need are coming in and no more. That's not going to happen. I'm afraid it's going to continue running totally out of control, whoever forms the next government. That's seriously worrying.